So you have the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah. Alif Lam Mim. Zalikal kitabu la rayba fi. Hudal lil muttaqin. So this is a book in which there is no doubt, and it is a guidance for those who fear Allah, or who are muttaqin. Yeah. Now, who are these? Allazina yu'minuna bil ghayb wa yuqimuna as-salata wa mimma razaqnahum yunfikun. Three things Allah says. Those who believe in the ghaib, who establish prayer, and who give out of what we have given them. So, giving out of what Allah has given you is one of the three key things which the God-fearing believers are required to do. Believe in the unseen, establish prayer, and giving. So, in fact, is used in many, many places in the Quran in this context. And Allah says, give and I will multiply it for you, and give and do this and this. So giving out of what He has given you becomes central. This shows that human being, especially the believer, is not supposed to think that what I have is mine. What I have is a trust which Allah has given me. I have to discharge this trust. I cannot say, this is mine, I don't care what other people do. And to reinforce this, so this is the verses. And then Allah has put a couple of other specific requirements, right? So you have the idea of zakat. Zakat, as most people understand it, is 2.5% of wealth or income or whatever, right, to be given. And then you have khums. Khums is actually to be given on Ganima. Now, I would translate Ganima as a windfall. Something which you got which you did not expect. So traditionally, khums was due on things like war booty or sudden findings of minerals or so on. These are windfalls. These are not from your effort or anything, but they just come and you distribute. And then khums, which means a fifth, was to be given to the Prophet and his progeny. So these are specific things. They can be classified as infaq, but they are not the only infaq. And if you want to compare this, there is a very, very beautiful couplet from Iqbal, Allama Iqbal. And he's talking about saying that कहते हैं कि हम तो फ़कत फ़र्ज़ ही पढ़ते हैं. People say that I only do the wajib salat, nothing more. जैसे कि कोई कर्ज अदा करना है. This is like as if you want to pay a debt. You don't want to do any favors, you just want to pay a debt. So giving khums and zakat is like that. It's a obligatory debt. But infaq is like what we will call nawafil. Prayers which you are not required to do, you are recommended to do, and if you do them, there are lots of good things which Allah will grant you because of that. So it's not like just discharging your daily prayers, the 17 rakas, but if you do more and more and more, then obviously that's what. So infaq is like that. But as we saw that infaq is the central pillar, which Allah says in the first Surah Al-Baqarah, after your belief in God, establishing prayer and infaq. So this is a central part of your life.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
How we could say zakat and khums as are not part of the,
Not part of?
is to be provided when what we provide you with. I mean, this is what you mean. God says this.
Yeah, they are part, but they are not. If you do that, your infaq is not finished. That is what I'm saying. I'm saying infaq is broader than khums and zakat. You see what I mean? Just like, say, pray, right? Allah says pray, the sort of say Salatul Layl, this, that, everything. But in terms of obligation, you only have to pray 17 rakas. Right? But that doesn't mean that prayer is only the 17 rakats. It means it's wider and you can do more. So here also, infaq is wider than khums and zakat, right? More than khums and zakat. Now we'll come to that because this is quite important. Now, if you look at zakat, the root comes from tazkiyah or purification. So as I understand it, zakat obviously is meant to repeatedly tell you that in what you make, it's not all yours. There is a portion for the community. And that is what tazkiyah means, to purify, to remind you that don't become arrogant, that what I have is not because of my brain or my hard work or so on, it is from Allah. And therefore, there are certain obligations you have to discharge. Khums, as we saw, is on windfalls. And some scholars, and especially the Ja'fari scholars, have interpreted excess income to your needs as a windfall. And therefore, you pay khums on that. But these two are not sufficient. From what I'm trying to tell you, that infaq is broader than that. Infaq is the central driving principle of a believing person, a muttaqi. Right? Let's go there. So what is the central problem here? Now you see, man or human being, in more gender neutral terms, you have three basic motivations. One is selfishness. What I have is mine. I don't want to give it to anybody. I don't want to think about anybody else. The second one is altruism, which is slightly less damaging than selfishness. It's I want to give in the hope that I will get back something, or it will benefit me in some time, some way, right? For example, we say that after the Second World War, the Americans decided to rebuild Europe. Now, this is the ultimate altruistic act. They understood that if we build Europe, this will become our biggest market. So although it was a very good gesture to give, but it was not selfless. There was a purpose behind it. And then, of course, the last one, which is much more noble, is fellow feeling. You feel for your other human beings and you give. This is like sacrifice. So these three basic driving forces move people towards doing things which they do. If any one of them becomes dominant, then you have a problem. If you become entirely selfish, then you cease to be a human being. If you become completely generous or completely selfless, then also you have a problem. If you only look at altruism, or give only where you think there is a good return for you, potentially, then again, you've lost the spirit of giving just out of giving. And in fact, it's just giving out of giving. Not saying that it will double or treble, although Allah says, I will double and treble. When you are giving, you are giving. Now, in this context, if you consider, as an economist, for example, when we look at it, we come to the conclusion that in the world, there is enough for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed. So it's only when you become greedy that certain parts, certain peoples are deprived of the basic resources. Otherwise, there is enough for everybody's need. The question is, how do we convert this selfishness, which is greed, to slightly more thinking of what we call the common good, of making people as part of your mission? This may benefit you. For example, when the welfare state was established, one of the questions was, why do we give people, just give like that? What is the point in that? And then people like Keynes, they said, look, if you sit down and think very hard, if you put money in the hands of people who have nothing or who have very little, what are they going to do with the money? They are going to buy your goods. So your sales will become even higher. Although you are giving, but when they buy your sales, they will become even higher. You will become even better off, and so on. So this is the main question. And this is what Allah says, you give and we give you double, treble, many times. Because obviously society as a whole will benefit. The question which has been dodging people is that are people poor or underprivileged because they are lazy, because they don't want to work, or is it because the system in which we are living makes them poor or underprivileged? Depending on what the answer is, will drive how you think about it, right? So you have today a language, for example, which the Conservative government has been using for the last 10 years. It's called skivers, yeah? People who want to skive from work. And just take from the strivers, people who strive hard, and then they have to pay these skivers to enjoy life. And so you drive thinking. In the time of Mrs. Thatcher, there was a minister called Sir Keith Joseph. He said, look, I don't think we should allow these people who are on benefits to have more than 2 children, full stop. And the same thing is happening today. There are a couple of ministers talking like that. And in fact, in terms of policy, I think you don't get child benefit after 2 children and so. Same policy that you don't want them. So this comes from the fact that, look, these laysabouts, actually we don't need them, but since we can't kill them, let's discourage them from having more than one child or two children or whatever. And that drives the whole ideology. On the other hand, and it drives the whole ideology and puts it where I think most of us and most of people in Victorian times and other times have seen it, that the poor are left at the mercy of the rich. You give and you feel like, and to whom you feel like. Some people get, some people don't get anything. And if you give and you don't like what they do with it, you don't give. Yeah?
Still we have it.
Yeah. So you say, sometimes I have heard that, look, we give these people money and they don't eat, but they buy a color television. This is their choice. We cannot dictate what somebody does with what you have given. But the idea is that because I am giving, I can determine what they should do and who should get it. Whereas the thinking is that, is there an institutional solution to this problem where you don't determine, there is a basic right for people to have certain things? And this is where the debate came for the different parts. Historically, as far as Muslims are concerned, this was conceived as what we know as the Baytul Mal. Everybody had a right to get the basics from the Baytul Mal. And initially you have seen, and we have heard lots of things, where some people try to get more than their share from the Baytul Mal, and then people in charge, the leaders said, no, we can't. This is Baytul Mal. This is not mine. I cannot give my brother more and somebody else less, and this and that. So this was quite a unique situation. Now what happened is that as Islam expanded so fast, the money coming into the Baytul Mal became very big. Now, as we know that when there is big money, there are big disputes as well, because it becomes too much. In fact, especially during the early Umayyad period, the expansion was very rapid, both in terms of towards Europe and towards Iran and so on. Now, these were all non-Arabs. Slowly, they started to have a categorization in the Baytul Mal, where the Arabs got more than the non-Arabs. Especially what they were called the Mawali, right? Mostly the Iranians and so on. And this started to breed a lot of resentment. If we are saying that we only distinguish on the basis of Iman, then now why are we distinguishing on the basis of race? Why are Arabs getting more than non-Arabs from the Baytul Mal? And to my mind, this was probably the key reason behind the fall of the Umayyad dynasty. All the forces which aligned against them were mostly those which were underprivileged. By the time Caliph Umar ibn Abdul Aziz came, which was one of the last Umayyad caliphs, he tried to put it back right, but it was late. A lot of other parties and groups had formed, said this should go. So what started as a proper Baytul Mal became distorted, and it never regained that position again. But the concept was there of universal basic rights for everybody in the Ummah. distributed from the central treasury, which was depository for all kinds of khums, zakat, whatever, and then distributed, right?
This is something like central bank.
Not central bank, central treasury. Central bank doesn't give you money, unfortunately, right? But this was, treasury used to give, and not loans, but just as a right. So just because you happen to be part of the ummah, you would get, you have a share. Yeah. And then there were lots of studies you can do. There were needs-based, there were general stipends, there were all kinds of things which people could. But you see, what you had was a kind of peace of mind that you can turn to somewhere if you were in need, and you will get it. So this is all you need. You need an insurance policy. You don't need the money in your hand. But if you know that tomorrow if you become seriously ill, somebody will look after that expense, you're fine. You don't need that money in your hand, right? So they had reached quite an advanced stage even then. But then because of this basic asabiya coming back into the body of Islam, as Ibn Khaldun says, we lost that spirit and we had a problem. Now, as I said, the question is whether this is part of laziness of some people, or is it the system which throws some people out or keeps them below or underprivileged? Increasingly, there was an understanding that it is the system which is making this problem, not individuals. There may be individuals, but overall. And then, during the Second World War and after, there were two things. One was that because of the war, there was a lot of loss of life and poverty. Because although Britain won the war, economically it was bankrupted. It didn't have anything left. In fact, part of the reason why it got out of, say, India and the other colonies was that it just didn't have the resource to run it anymore. But there was also an alternative coming up in the form of communism. Russia was already communist, and China was near there. Thinking in Europe was also saying that, look, this kind of market capitalism has not delivered anything. We should look at communism as an alternative. And if you look at this, some of the big famous names, people like Philby and so on, which defected to Russia as spies or from Oxford and Cambridge and so on. So there was a fear in the establishment that if nothing is done, people will revolt against this system. And of course, post-war, the new Labour government and the new thinking which was coming, that it was not the people, it was the system which is making problem, made the establishment of the welfare state as we know it possible. Britain was not, as I said, a rich country at that time. It was a poor country, but ideologically it took this challenge. And we established the health service, free education, and potentially not quite free, but subsidized shelter, which is the basic components of the welfare state, funded from tax revenues and redistributed. Recognizing for the first time that the poor or the underprivileged are not at the mercy of the rich. They have an institutional entitlement to these things. From 45 to 75, roughly, this structure worked very well. It kept the peace, And it built a basic resilience in our society. Life expectancy went up from 48 to 75 on average. So many other things, of course, changed. Inequality fell. When things were working, then obviously people who believe in free markets, they said this is not good enough. We need to have some more sparks, some more opportunities. We can't control everything text and, So they, during the time of Thatcher and Reagan and so on, they started again this question of markets, allowing markets to do what they want, suggesting that inequality really was not a problem because it was a short-term issue. In the long term, everything will balance out if we allow the markets to grow. We need to grow more. Although for a little while in the 90s, it seemed that this was the right thing, if you now look at it, average growth in those 40 years was much higher than now. Because we have now lost almost 15 years of growth in these economies. Okay? But that is a discussion for some other time. The question here is, revival of these things has seen again an increase in inequality, both globally and in country-wise as well. In fact, post-90s, post-70s, the West became so confident that you had people like Francis Fukuyama. I don't know if anybody has heard of Fukuyama. He wrote a book. He's an American professor, originally from Japan. And his most famous book is known as The End of History. He says that with this liberalism, what we have got in the 90s, history has come to an end. We have discovered everything we need to discover about history, and everybody else needs to follow this formula to become rich and satisfied. It was only 10 years before the financial crisis, and then Fukuyama is now talking about starting history again, because there wasn't the end. But anyway, that was just expressing the kind of sentiment, right? But ultimately it proved to be a formula for some people to monopolize profits and push any losses onto the people, socialize the losses, which has now become known as neoliberalism. The best, Neoliberalism. The best summary of neoliberalism, again, is given by this very perceptive poet of ours, Allama Iqbal. There is a poem by him which is titled Lenin's Complaint to God. Lenin, as you know, was one of the founders of communism in Russia. And in his imaginary poem, Iqbal says Lenin is talking to God as to why he doesn't believe in God. Clearly, one of the communism's founding thing was that religion is the opium of the masses, right? So we forget it and we talk about something else. So here Lenin says, look, God, let me tell you something about your God-fearing people. So he says, गिरजों से इमारत बुनूक कई बार बड़ी है. The buildings of banks are several times bigger than those of churches. जाहिर में तो तिजारत है, हकीकत में जुआ है. In appearance, the business of banks, the work of banks is business, tijarat, trade. In reality, it is gambling. हकीकत में जुआ है. Why? इसमें एक को लाखों और लाखों को मर्ग मफाजात. In this, individuals can make millions and millions become destitute. This is the work of banks. ये इल्म, ये हिकमत, ये तदब्बर, ये हुकूमत, पीते हैं लहू, देते हैं दर्स मसावात. This governance, this knowledge, this wisdom, this progress, all this, they drink people's blood and preach equality of mankind. This is Iqbal's summary of, apt, very beautiful summary of neoliberalism. That's exactly what it does. And if you read the latest encyclical of the Pope Francis, which is called Laudato Si, which is translated from the Italian as the common good. In it, of course, like other church, other popes before him and church leaders generally, they have a lot of saying as to how poverty is bad and so on, and society should not create poverty and so on. Pope Francis goes further. When you see something which is quite useful for religious theologians and so on, he comes up with the idea of neoliberalism as structural sin, not sin, systemic sin. So, as I was telling you, he is quite clear that this kind of poverty and underprivilege we have is not because of these people, it is because of the system. And so this sin is in the system. We have to change this system as a matter of religion. Otherwise, he said, you create poor people and we look after them. How many can we look after? You're creating millions, not 1, 2, every day. And this is not possible and it cannot go on. So the Catholics, of course, especially the American Roman Catholics, they say we're waiting for this old man to go because the man is talking things which we cannot digest. He's talking revolution here. He's talking that we are all involved in sin every day of our life. But that is where the debate is, right? And the principle behind this, we will give a lecture on this financialization at some stage. This is a process of creating wealth without productivity, creating a rentier state. So if you, for example, see, if you bought a house 10 years ago, now it is doubled in price, or maybe more. Did you do anything to double that? Apart from buying it? Did you make any effort on it? So how can it double in price? What happened to make it double in price? Where did the money come from? When I say doubled in price, you can physically sell your house at twice the price, right? You may not be able to buy another one, but the question is you can sell it, yeah? Without you having done anything, it has doubled or sometimes quadrupled or sometimes 10 times, 20 times, whatever. So the idea of effort leading to wealth is gone. Now, if you see that this has doubled in price, what do you want to do over the next 10 years? You want to buy another house. You say, if this doubles, I don't need to work, man. Yes? And this is what is called financialization and a rentier economy. You want to make money out of doing nothing. You want to find more and more ingenious ways to do that. Clearly, not everybody can do that. So the minority can benefit, the majority can live on the breadline. And this is the system we are landed with. And obviously, as people begin to realize this, they're stuck at the bottom. You're seeing statistics now, for example, here. There may be 60% of the people have not got more than 300 pounds of cover if anything goes wrong. Just 300 pounds could disturb their life altogether. If you're living with that knowledge, look at the stress you are under. Because you are in really hand to mouth, yeah? Just you fall 2 days and your employer doesn't pay and you're out of business. Or something happens, whatever. Your washing machine breaks down. You have to buy a new one. Out of business. So this obviously makes people quite susceptible to see that, look, I'm not getting anywhere. Who is at fault? So for example, here you say, immigrants are at fault. Good, they are taking my job. I can't get it. And therefore, that's first target. Say, rich people are at fault. This is at fault. That is at fault. And you start to believe people like Trump who tell you, I can solve everything if you just vote me in. That is what is called populism. Just like if you see you have an illness, all the doctors say, look, there is no cure here, man. You have tried everything. And I come along and you say, look, if you drink this juice every day, you will be cured. You start taking it religiously. You say, what is the harm? I mean, the doctors have given up. So I do whatever. And then another person can say, forget him, do this and you will get it. And I do this, and you do this, and you do this. And you see people doing all kinds of things which really make no sense. But that's desperation. And so here also, you are going into desperation. Now here you come against this problem that democracy can actually challenge neoliberalism. Because you don't get allowed to do whatever you like to do. If you want the vote, yeah? Unless you now want to go towards totalitarianism, which means shut democracy off, which is possible to happen. Or you start playing with the people all the time like Trump. 1 year is gone, another 2 you will see even more games. Things like, some of these things are amazing. You see on television that it is really, really sparse, his inauguration. And he says, this is the biggest crowd ever. I said, man, look at the screens. He said, no, they are lying. And you get this kind of things. Even yesterday he was saying that more people watched my State of the Union address. Then you find, no, actually not. There are others who had. But he says, well, whoever doesn't agree is lying. Finished. So you get this kind of things going on because you want to keep power by any means, and slowly you get a slide into totalitarianism. Does it address inequality or the basic cause? Maybe not. So we come to this big question. And this is where somebody like Mr. Piketty comes in, Thomas Piketty, who is a French economist. Piketty has done 50 years of work on measuring inequality in the world, in different countries, different statistics, and so on. He has debunked the idea that what Reagan and Thatcher were saying, that if you free the market, there will be inequality in the beginning and then wealth will trickle down and everybody will be happy. He shows that this does not happen. In fact, if you do that, there will be what he calls a hovering up of wealth, not a trickle down, which means the concentration will get even worse. And he comes with the idea that the only way to stop this effortless increase in asset prices is to tax that wealth. And he's talking of something like 2 to 4% wealth tax annual. And we have zakat at 2.5 annual. Always there, if you apply it properly. So the thinking is quite close, that you cannot allow rentier economies to develop. In fact, in historic times in Christianity, it was very interesting. Every 50 years, they had what was called a debt jubilee. All debts were forgiven, full stop, finished. And then you start again. Yeah. Because what used to happen is that when you used to have debt, then people used to sell themselves in bondage. This is where the word bondage comes from. Actually, the word debt also comes from bondage. To repay your debt, you sell yourself and you work free until you repay your debt and then you are set free. And so more and more people were becoming slaves because of the debt. And so part of the Christian prescription was to forgive all debt every 50 years, so you square it again and you go on. Piketty says that this is not possible now. So we need to have a wealth kind of tax to understand where we can take to. And we have to, obviously to do that, we have to reevaluate the balance between state and market. State will have to be much more forceful. Markets will have to be tamed and not let rip people. So when I mean by rip people, for example, look at this recent collapse of this company, Carleon. Yeah. Apart from other things, which this is a complex story, one of the things which they have done is that instead of filling the gap in the pension fund, they've been paying dividends when things were not good. Now when they collapse, we find that the pension fund hasn't got money to pay the pensioners, to pay the people who are working for this company. And they go to the pension trust fund, who gives you less than what you were entitled to, and sometimes nothing, and so on and so forth. So there, the state will have to be much more forceful. Say, sorry, Beck, no dividends when there is a gap in the pension fund, full stop. Make sure there is no gap, then you can pay yourselves. But otherwise, no. These are not easy things. This will have to be very muscular and robust. Okay. So we come to the last thing. First of all, as I said, you have khums and zakat and other things, ushr and so on, which are compulsory taxes, but you have this overriding obligation for infaq. So believers have to be conditioned that giving is the status quo, not hoarding, not keeping yourself. Giving is the idea of what needs to be done. And of course, giving for the common good. We have brains, so we have to design systems which make it possible, like Professor Portis, for example, last week was showing, that a few of the basic things can be given quite easily, little bit more, and then you have more challenging issues, but a few things can be given quite easily. And this is common with the faith communities, and maybe some of the non-faith people can also begin to understand the importance of this issue. Because what Piketty says, and what is generally true, is that whenever historically inequality has reached where it is today, it has only been solved by war or revolution, not by consent. So he's saying, if you want war or revolution, fine. But if you want to learn from history, we want to begin to do some of these things, like wealth tax and so on, and making sure that we don't blame the poor for the poverty. We make sure that it is a system which is creating this, and it is a system which needs to be reformed. And there are many, many things which we can look at, but those will take us really into serious economics, maybe 6 to 10 lectures to dissect these things one by one, how to create this thing for the 21st century. But if you build the individual with the frame of mind that giving is the default position, not hoarding, then we have a starting point where the Islamic sentiment can begin to reform the welfare state. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. We have some time for question and answers. Do we have any questions?
Thank you. I had a question about the kind of trajectory of societies in terms of becoming more consumerist and more materialistic. How do you create a welfare state that doesn't become excessively consumeristic or doesn't encourage excessive consumerism or materialism? So, for example, we might want to create, might want to put more funding into, say, the NHS, but actually, I think people, and I'm talking across the board, have, I think, an unreasonable understanding of what a health service should deliver and what we expect of health professionals, for example. And I think that's driven by this sense of entitlement. We see the health service as almost being God in the sense, so anything that potentially goes wrong is somehow, it's just this unreasonableness that I think comes with this idea that we should have everything, if that makes sense. So we can't deal with death, for example. We don't know how to deal with elderly care properly. I think all of these things are driven by this idea of there is nothing more than the material.
Okay, so there are two questions here, right? One is a consumer culture, okay? The consumer culture, in many ways, is driven by credit. You wouldn't be able to afford everything you have if you didn't have credit or easy credit, okay? You can see that if you take up every offer of a credit card you get, you could be sitting on 70 to 80,000 pounds of credit with a very small basic salary. They don't care. and you could lend yourself into a big mess, sitting on 2 cars and 3 this and whatever, but not being able to pay your credit card bills. So this is one of the things, and this is where you give credit in order to encourage production and growth. And Lord Turner, Adair Turner, who was the last chairman of the FSA before the crisis, has written a book. His latest book is called Between Debt and the Devil. That we can only grow by creating more debt, but getting into more debt takes us to the devil because we can collapse. So unfortunately we are in that. So that's consumerism, right? That will have to be, and it's not only here. Once I was in Dubai and I went to a bookshop and I was looking at a book. This was a sort of very simplified illustration of an Islamic finance book with cartoons and all kinds of things. Out of curiosity, I said, well, if they are able to explain this very simply, maybe some of my students can benefit. So looking at it, and you're saying that the man comes to a shop and he says, I want to buy a small car on finance. I mean, I have X amount and I think I can afford this. So the man says, no, why you want to buy a small car? We can finance you to buy a big car. You don't need to buy a small car. Whatever you want, 4x4 and so, you can take it to the desert and you can do whatever. This is in Dubai. And we can do it all with Islamic finance. So even there, the idea is to push more consumerism. The man is saying, I want a small car, which is what I can afford comfortably. You are pushing him to something which he cannot afford, but you are making it possible for him to afford temporarily until he gets into a mess. So it is not only confined to here, it is general, right? And this culture will have to change. The second part of your question, things like NHS or education or whatever, are more complex. Are you saying, for example, that we should not treat anybody who smokes for smoke-related ailments, yeah, or anybody who drinks, or whatever? Now, that brings a level of state intervention which is quite, yes, we can say that we should be spending more money on public health to alert people as to the dangers of these things. But if you say we cannot spend, then we have issues of liberty and freedom. But if you had less consumerism, you would have less of these problems. Yeah, that's one. But then, now, for example, for the first time in the last 50 years, both in the United States and here, life expectancy has stagnated or is falling marginally in some parts. Whether it is related to austerity, we don't know yet. The causation is not clear, but the fact is there. And that's where we will get to.
Yeah, it's very interesting talk. You talked about the system. You said the system is pushing people towards poverty, but how would you make people more productive? Because we know on the system some, just for example, within the welfare state, enjoys the state and don't want to work. But how would you counterattack that? It's like how would you encourage people to be more productive and get into the job market?
So you're starting from the fact that certain people don't want to work because you give them what they need. And they don't work, yes?
They have it already on the system.
Do you think that that is how they like to live?
I don't
Okay, so a number of experiments are happening at the moment in different parts, yeah? Sweden, in Canada, in one or two other places, where they have started small experiments in what they call universal basic income, to give a basic income to everybody, right? Not only the poor, everybody. And see what people do. And they find that when the stress of paying the next bill is not there, people do amazing things. Nobody sits around doing nothing. They look for better things to do. So I think that premise which we have, which is common, there are certain people, because they get everything, they don't work. It doesn't mean they are stress-free. If you have seen, for example, these are the people who have to go and put money in their gas meters because they cannot get it on standing orders. They might not have bank accounts. And we charge them, this is important. If you are paying by regular monthly standing order, you get a certain amount of what tariff you have, yeah? The gas company is taking a credit risk on you because you might not pay. You might lose your job, you might not be able to pay your standing order, and so on. But the person who is on benefits, he doesn't get that, or she doesn't get that. They have to go to the post office and charge this meter by paying cash. So the gas company taking no credit risk. Before, if they don't receive cash, they don't give gas or electricity, right? So which should be cheaper? The cash should be cheaper? It is 33% more expensive than the standing order. No, but the credit risk is not there, right? But not 33%. Post office doesn't need 33%, yeah. So, no, the idea is that when you are looking at the system, how the system is loaded against these people, this is what it is, right? And increasingly you have, now there are challenges coming, you have things like Uber, for example. You're telling the driver, you have to be on call. But we may not call you. But if we call you and you are not there, we fire you. So you say, can I expect 3 days work, 4 days work a week? We don't know. Maybe 2, maybe 6. How do you plan on that? To pay certain outgoings, like your mortgage or your bills or whatever, right? They don't get holidays. They don't get sick leave. They don't work, they don't get money. Full stop.
They are on holidays all the time.
Yeah, but no money, yeah? So, more and more people are in this kind of situation, which is very stressful. Because you don't have a regular income which you can plan what you can do. You don't have pension, you don't have anything. And so to say now that this guy is lazy, it's an injustice on the person.
Lazy is one thing, but this reminds me of a case that the woman had 13 children with 4 or 5 men.
Yes.
Now why is the government is giving them 4-story house for all those and all the amenities? Why?
So, so what shall the government do? Shall we tell them that, okay, go to hell?
If you have got more than one
Yeah, I see.
children, you can give it that much, not more.
So,
No matter what you do.
yeah, this is what, this is, as I said before, this is where it comes to. Once you get into that situation, we don't realize that bearing 13 children is not a joke.
Yeah, but why they are doing it?
This is their choice.
Nobody forced them to have 4 men.
And inshallah, we hope that these 13, when they become older, they will contribute to the society.
No, they will do the same thing.
I don't think so. Yeah, no, one of, so you see, it's very, very exceptional. The more common thing is 2 or 3 children really living in poverty, if you go and see them, trying to make ends meet, and people looking at them as if they are, not human beings. This is not the way to deal with it. The way to deal with it is with compassion and understanding how you build this society. Everybody has potential to do something, and you make them do it.
You mean they have got potential to produce 13 children? So,
No, it's not 13. I don't think every woman is going to produce 13, so you don't have to worry about that. I think if they have more than 2 children, you should be thankful, but they won't.
yeah, but the government should not pay for 13.
No, it's not government's choice, yeah? Yes.
One other thing is to say that people, like children, are not necessarily responsible for the choices that their parents make. And so a woman that has 13 children, those children still need to grow up and need to be sustained. And that's independently of what their parents do. You can't just leave them because their
Yeah, but
parents have 13 children.
Not with one man, or 4 men.
Yeah, but you see, no, you can see, with these 13 children, we need 13 less immigrants in this country. There is a plus point there, right? Now, if we bring them up properly, if you throw them on the road, yeah, of course.
Then you're going to have the same problem multiplied.
Parviz?
So, in the absence of the revolution and the war, what should we be doing? I mean, should we not buy property with the hope that it will increase in value over time? How should we, we're stuck inside the structure. What should we be doing?
So you see, these are some fundamental principles of economics here, right? That individual preference, which is absolutely logical, rational, whatever, can be damaging to society. So let me give you an example. If you hear that 3 of your friends have lost their jobs, yeah, you get a certain kind of feeling that things are not right. And you might postpone buying something. In the back of your mind is that, look, if for any reason I lose my job, I need some reserve to keep me going, right? If everybody thinks like that, demand will go down and more people will lose their jobs. So whilst you are behaving absolutely rationally, you are inflicting a problem on society indirectly, which is going to create this problem worse, right? So here I'm not saying that you don't, as an individual, you don't buy a house. What I'm saying is that as a collection, can we begin to think that we need to pay part of that gain back to society? And that's where the wealth tax comes in. If you begin to do that, then you will address the problem much more forcefully than otherwise.
It's interesting, you keep repeating is the system. And the system is, you just remind me actually to change the subject. It's coming actually related to parliament. If the parliament would just legislate the law, if it is not fair and is really for the benefit of the parliamentarian, we cannot do anything about it. In reality, actually, we have, this is what's happening in Iraq now. You got the parliamentarian corrupt, and they legislate degrees which is not benefit for the masses. Therefore, we come to this situation, actually, of we living in a financial system And the people who put actually the regulation is actually the financial establishment, bankers and financial institutions. The poor guy living somewhere, he's just going to accept what's coming from the top. If the system, as you call it, is against actually individual, there's the only way around it is revolution, to really have to turn the things upside down.
So there are two things here, right? Things are relative. Iraq, of course, is the worst case, I think, because the only time there is full attendance in your parliament is when they are discussing an increase in the salaries of the MPs. Every other time, including the most serious issues, they don't have a quorum. Okay? Huh? PM time, they're mostly there. Yeah, but this is really bad kind of reflection on what is happening, right? Yeah, standing room only. But and I'm not sure if the Iraqi people think that there is nothing can be done to change this. Or is it possible that in the next election we change some of it? If they come to the conclusion over and over that nothing can be done to change this, then there will be a revolution, right? Having said that, a revolution is not going to solve the situation. It might make it worse. So, everywhere. This is why people are afraid of revolutions, right? Because it's not necessarily going, it might turn the table, but it's not going to solve the situation. It will open up things which might fall out better or worse. And people, when they read history, they understand that. And you see, this is why the only way to do it, if more people have a stake in society, they will work better. If 60% of your people feel that whoever is there, my thing is not going to change, you don't care. Or you say, oh, if this government changes, I might lose my house or my shop or my whatever, my job, then you care. So you have to create more stake. Here also, it's better because you still feel that I can bring Corbyn into power. Right? Whether I can or not is a different question. I feel that I can. When I give up that, I say, whatever I do, he will never come, then I might be ready for a revolution. So it's a question of judging these things, right? Religiously, how can we say that our government, these guys only come to parliament when there is a salary increase to be discussed? Yeah, what kind of moral obligation they are showing? It's terrible.
But some of the rules of this government are very odd. For example, I am over 80 and I am partly disabled as well. And my for dentist, I have to pay. They don't give me anything because they say that you are not getting benefit from the concurrence, therefore you have to pay. Those who are getting the benefit, they don't pay for the dentures. So it's a stupid way of rules.
I mean, there may be unfairness in few things, but I don't think it is basically wrong. If you can afford, you should pay.
The point is that I am disabled and I am over 80 old age.
That's fine. Still,
and therefore, they should all the medicines I get, but dental I have to pay.
yeah, just a few things.
If I am getting benefit from the council, then that is free as well.
Because you are then in a situation that person is worse off than you.
The point is that I am doing everything myself, so that thing should be free as well.
Yeah, sorry. You're not in poverty, right?
So they are punishing me for that.
No, you are contributing to the society.
No, I'm not contributing. I did contribute for
Okay.
40 years when I was employed.
Thank you very much.
Get the benefit.
I think we've run out of time there, so inshallah we'll end. Thank you very much, Iqbal uncle. Could we have a loud salawat?